This is Legion Field, Birmingham, Alabama. They call it the football capital of the South. Hi, I'm Merle Harmon with Alex Hawkins, and welcome to the first World Bowl. Well, all the tension, the excitement, the color of a championship ball game is here. And Alex, it should be a great matchup.
There's no question about it. This is what both of these teams have been pointing to since June the 3rd of this year, and I don't think they could have picked two more evenly matched teams, Merle.
Well, both of them had very tough semifinal games to get here in the first place. Birmingham beat the Hawaiians a week ago in a ball game that ended up in a 22-19 score. And one of the stars, of course, Matthew Reed, another Alfred Jenkins. This combo has pulled Birmingham out time and time again. Reed also a fine running quarterback. He's the backup to George Mara, but he can do it. On the other side of the ledger, well, the Florida Blazers have a great running game, and it's led by Tommy Riemann, who gained 1,576 yards to lead all rushers in the WFL this year. He had great blocking, but Riemann has been a team leader, as he was against Memphis. Florida won that game 18-15 after trailing at the half 15-3. Richard James gives Florida the great outside running threat to go along with Riemann, and those two fellows should put on quite a show tonight. Offense and defense, that's 2/3 of the story. The other third belongs to Alex Hawkins.
You betcha. You've left out one important ingredient, and that's the special teams, and that's the thing that is so important to both of these teams. Last week's game, there's the Memphis team who is ahead at the ball game with the Florida Blazers. Time is running out, less than 2 minutes to play, and they need possession of the ball again, and you see Luther Palmer, he's the king of the special teams in this league, and he's done a great job all year. An opportunistic team on special teams, and it's turned it around and made do that same thing tonight.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Hello there. Welcome, friends, to the weekly proceedings that we call Good Seats Still Available, our curious little podcast journey into what used to be in professional sports. We are delighted and tickled pink to go back into the World Football League, a treasure trove of intrigue that seems to be newly interesting to lots of people, especially as the Alliance of American Football saddles its way through its first ever season. And the newly reconstituted XFL makes some announcements of their own for their return next season. Spring football is in the air, and we love the idea of going back into time to look at other challenger leagues to the supremacy of the National Football League. And God knows we've got plenty of episodes previously devoted to such. But among our more listened to sets of episodes have been our conversations with the great WFL researcher, Mark Speck. And I urge you all, if you haven't listened to some of the earlier ones that we've done with Mark around some of his other writings around the World Football League, you're in for a treat. And as many of you have discovered, the World Football League continues to confound and become an interesting or evolving curiosity. And we're going to take an opportunity to welcome Mark back to the show after about a year or so. We're going to talk about one of those teams in the World Football League, perhaps one of the most emblematic of all the ill-conceived and just dumb and bad luck and or shenanigans around that league. And the team, of course, was the Florida Blazers that were domiciled in Orlando back in 1974 for barely one season of the WFL. And we're going to get into some of those specifics and some just not only head scratching, but just phenomenally hard to believe stories. This is a team that, you were talking about 13 weeks into the season where the players weren't paid. And it got worse from there, if you can believe it. This is a team that had two ports of call prior to finding a home in Orlando. That's even before a first game was ever played. You've got an obvious and understandable, right, when you know the WFL's story, set of characters in the ownership ranks, both real and what ultimately became imagined. And it's just a really interesting microcosm, the Florida Blazers. were of the WFL writ large. And we're going to get to all those unbelievable twists and turns with our guest this week, our return guest, Mark Speck. He, the author of And a Dollar Short, The Empty Promises, Broken Dreams, and Somewhat Less Than Comic Misadventures of the 1974 Florida Blazers book. And we'll get into that conversation in just a couple of moments. But before we do so, I want to thank two of our very logical sponsors this week. Can't think of more appropriate promotions than these from our friends at oldschoolshirts.com, where you can use the promo code GOODSEATS to get 10% off all of your purchases. And of course, to commemorate this episode, you will find a beautiful blue Florida Blazers logoed T-shirt from the old WFL. It is distressed looking, and it is just beautifully done, as all the Old School Shirts properties are. And it's among the vast array of not only WFL team logo shirts and whatnot, but plenty of old leagues and teams from other leagues and other sports, and as well as things like radio stations and old amusement parks and other sort of local areas of forgotten history, all commemorated in a beautiful, high-quality, crafted T-shirt form. At our friends oldschoolshirts.com, use the promo code GOODSEATS to get 10% off all of your purchases. And you may want to take a look, like I said, at that Florida Blazers beautiful baby blue T-shirt that they've got, and it's very smart looking, and I think you'll absolutely enjoy it. So give them a check out at oldschoolshirts.com and use that promo code GOODSEATS for 10% off all of your purchases. And once you're done there, or maybe even before you go there, check out our logical friends at 503 Sports. That's 503-sports.com. Don't forget the dash in between. And we got a promo code for you there, too. It's SEATS, S-E-A-T-S, and you're going to get 10% off all of your purchases there. And not only will you find a bunch of World Football League T-shirts and whatnot, including for that of the Florida Blazers, but uniquely, you will find a Florida Blazers WFL jersey. These are custom made in very small batches by our friends at 503 Sports. The original colors and logos. You can get your name embroidered on the back. These are really high quality, authentic recreations of various garb from teams and leagues no longer with us. And the jerseys that they make around forgotten football teams are especially notable. And the WFL is supreme among their custom collection. And if you check it out, the Florida Blazers WFL jersey, it's a beautiful sort of a crimson red with blue and white stripes and lettering and numerals. It's got the official authentic 503 Sports embroidered logo in there. And you're going to be the envy of everybody in your neighborhood, for especially you folks in Orlando who may remember the barely won season of the Florida Blazers in the World Football League. So again, that's 503 Sports. Check them out at 503-sports.com. Don't forget that dash, 503-sports.com. Promo code SEATS to get 10% off all of your purchases, including, if you fancy it, that beautifully crafted and smart looking Florida Blazers World Football League jersey. And our thanks to 503 Sports, our thanks to oldschoolshirts.com, and our thanks to you for not only listening thus far, but going forward for our very fun, as always, conversation with our WFL expert, our resident expert. His name is Mark Speck, and here's our conversation that we had just a couple of weeks ago. The WFL continues to be not only an enigma, but a fascination with our little hardy band of listeners. And I will tell our audience that the episodes that we've done with you, which is almost a year ago now, amongst the 100 now plus total that we've done, are easily in the top 2 or 3 episodes. And I think that's obviously because you're a compelling interview, of course. But secondly, is this eternal fascination with professional football, maybe aided and abetted by the arrival of 2 yet again new challengers, the AAF and next year's reconstituted XFL. Maybe we could kind of just start, though, with to remind our audience who you are and what you've done in and around the realm of the WFL, because, obviously you're a locus for much information about this 1.5-year-old or only league that continues to fascinate.
Yeah, it continues to fascinate me, and it continues to amaze me how many people are still interested in it. When I started really seriously researching the league back in the 80s, I figured I was the only person out there doing it. Nobody else could at all be, interested in an old league, like you said, that lasted 1.5 years, lost a ton of money. And I just was amazed that when I found out there was really a big group of people out there that were just fascinated by it, that were interested in it, that collected and also researched it. And it still amazes me to this day. I mean, I started on, like I said, in the mid-'80s. I started researching when I lived in Arizona. I went down to Arizona State to the library, went through reams of old newspapers and the microfilm. I mean, I looked at microfilm until I thought my eyeballs were going to implode because it just, on and on and on. But it was fascinating. It was incredibly enjoyable just doing that, just finding out things that, wasn't really researched at the time. There was no books except for the one by Herb Gluck that was out there. It had been pretty much forgotten, and this was right around the time of the USFL when it came out. And I think there was a little bit more of a resurgence in the interest in the WFL because of the fact that they had another new league, and they said, well, what have they done that before? And yeah, they had, and I think that had the effect of bringing that resurgence of interest back out again for the WFL, and it's lasted now till today.
Well, look, and again, the Alliance of American Football, which interestingly had some interesting financial issues just this week as we're recording this episode. Not a surprise if you look back into the annals of pro football challengers, right? And the XFL newly reconstituted next year. Who's to say that they won't go through some of the same issues that arguably you can sort of see the seeds or some of the original lessons from the WFL?
Oh yeah, I mean it's you can go all the way back to the early AFLs in the 30s and 40s that tried to buck up against the NFL. They didn't last very long. You had the AAFC, the All-American Conference, that lasted 4 years. One of the better competitors, I think, they managed to get some of their teams into the NFL. And then you had the AFL, which probably was the best one, but it was a good time for them to come along. At the earlier rivals, I think, came along at a time when the NFL was still pretty, wasn't really a big league that they, football itself, let me rephrase that. Pro football itself really wasn't the juggernaut it is today, or even in the 60s and 70s. It was not that popular yet. It was still kind of a second fiddle to college football. They looked down on pro football because the college football was the king at the time. Army, Navy, that kind of thing. Notre Dame. But by the 60s, when NFL really exploded with, like say the 58 championship game with the Colts beating the Giants in overtime, the NFL popularity exploded, and it was a good time for a new league to come in, and that's what helped the AFL. It was just that popularity that helped them. But by that time, the WFL came in. It had kind of crested, and the NFL was, solid. Gary Davidson, who had founded the league, the WFL, thought maybe it was time for a rival. It obviously wasn't, and it wasn't poorly. It was poorly handled by the WFL, by the people who ran the teams, by the people who ran the league. It was just not well done. I don't know if it would have been, if it would have lasted as long as, say, the AFL or become a second league. But at that time, by then, it was really not. And now, the USFL did it the right way by going off season in the spring. I think if they had stayed in the spring, they might still be around. I don't know. But I'm not sure how these new ones are going to go either. Like you said, the new AAF already has some financial problems a couple of weeks into the season. That's really not a good sign. I've seen some of the games where the crowds don't look all that great. I think their viewership went way down, kind of like the old XFL did there. They had the first week, went great. And then by the second week, then people had said, well, it wasn't really what I wanted. The wrestling fans wanted more wrestling. The football fans wanted better football, and neither one of them got what they wanted. So maybe when they try this new XFL, maybe they'll refine it a little bit, make the football a little bit better, and kind of put the gimmicky kind of wrestling things on the back burner.
All right. Well, we'll get to the Blazers in 1 second, but remind me as to why you, right? What was the fascination that convinced you to why research all this stuff in the first place? What's the burning interest underneath your steely exterior that makes you so passionate about this league and the team that we're going to talk about today, the Florida Blazers?
Well, it's just the affinity of having, an underdog. I've loved the underdog. I think that anybody that would take on a league as powerful as the NFL or the NBA or the NHL or whatever it's been through the years and try to take them on, I think that shows a lot of guts because, you're really kind of maybe a losing proposition, but you're still going to go out there anyway and try it. And that's the background of why I like it. But as far as the Blazers, with the WFL, I remember a book back in the 70s. They had a series of books that came out, best sports stories of the year. I can't remember who it was that put it out, but it was like a few years they put it out for every year. And they had one, I found one for 1975, which covered the year 1974. And they had a story in there that was basically kind of in generalities the WFL, but in particular was the Blazers. And they talked a lot about the Blazers, about what the hardships the team went through. They weren't getting paid. They didn't get paid for like the last 13 weeks of the season. They were bankrupt, but the team kept winning. The team kept together and kept playing, mainly because of their head coach, Jack Pardee, who some people said shouldn't have been just a coach of the year. He should have been the coach of all time for the job that he did, keeping those guys together and keeping them playing and winning, despite all the fact, everything that they had to go through, including like looking out in the parking lot from the Tangerine Bowl and seeing the repo men coming and taking their cars away while the game was playing. So it's just a long laundry list of things, but it was just amazing how they stuck together, kept playing, kept winning. Unlike some other teams in the league that, they played, but they kind of went through the motions, didn't do as well. But the Blazers won the Eastern Division, went in the playoffs, won a couple games, went to the World League, World Bowl, and almost won it, lost by 1 point. So it's just an amazing story to me. After I started researching it, after I read that original book and found it just leafing through it in the library one day, and I thought, this sounds like a good story. And it really was. It was an amazing story. And the more I delved into it, the more I looked into it, the more I started talking to some of the players and doing interviews. It was just an amazing story that came out from all of them. That that they just put up with all this stuff and amazingly almost won the league championship.
All right, well let's dial the story back to the mid to late year of 1973, and I'm going to use this as a little background as a backstop because I have here on my podcast studio desk a book by Gary Davidson that was published in 1974. It's called "Breaking the Game Wide Open." I'm sure you're familiar with it. And yep. Ghost written, I think, with a guy named Bill Libby. And it's there's no way to sort of better to describe it as more of a one-person sort of narrative of the sheer chutzpah of this guy, Gary Davidson, who someday we'll get on this show, hopefully, to hear some first-person stuff. But the book came out just before the WFL launched, right? And this is off the back of his involvement with the ABA and the WHA, where and you read this book, right? It's all like, these are two leagues, the WHA and the ABA are well on their way to success. And when he gets into the latter chapters around how the football league got put together, you hear in the narrative is just hustle after hustle after hustle to get franchises, and I don't want to call them suckers, right? That's more through the lens of history, right? But the idea of getting other people's money to buy franchises in an aspirational idea at best, I guess is how I would characterize it. Maybe you can kind of use that as a backdrop to maybe put the Blazers, which weren't even the Blazers at this time, into context as this league was being formed, mostly through the chutzpah and the mindset of this Gary Davidson character.
Yeah, I mean, he started the whole thing. He had, like you said, he had some success with the ABA and the WHA. He was all full of himself by now. He'd started 2 leagues. He thought, hey, let's try the NFL this time. He thought he called them fat and arrogant. They were time for a rival to come in. But yeah, his idea was he didn't do anything as mundane as like a background check on a lot of these guys that they picked to be owners. Some of the guys in the league that originally went in, the original, what they would call owners, just took them by name only and then would sell them at a big profit, Gary Davidson being one of them. He had the Philadelphia team, which he then sold for an astronomical amount to someone else. And a lot of the other guys did that. And Davidson had done that in the WHA with a franchise that he had in San Francisco that said, okay, we're going to have a team here. But what he did was he just sold it, and they went to Quebec, and he made a ton of money on there. So it was kind of hustle, kind of let's just fly by night. Let's not do anything as far as like looking into these people. Do they have the money? Do they have the wherewithal to really stick in there and be successful and try to, financially make it through, which is going to be a very tough period at starting out, as you would know. With any new league, they're going to have struggles at the beginning because they're trying to establish themselves. They're trying to make themselves a part of the football franchise landscape, and instead they're, you really need guys with deep pockets with a lot of money, and a lot of times they didn't have that, including the Blazers. The Blazers had a guy named E. Joseph Wheeler, who started the team in Washington, D.C. He tried to start there. The Redskins had pretty much an ironclad. They pretty much had the RFK Stadium to themselves. They had a lease that couldn't be broken. And I think Wheeler said at one time you couldn't have a PTA meeting in RFK without asking the Redskins to do it. But it was just something they couldn't get a lease to get the field. They tried. Then they tried to move to Annapolis, Maryland, in the Naval Academy Stadium, which was a nice stadium. However, it didn't have lights, which is kind of tough when you're going to play night football every week. So, and they said at the earliest they could really get the lights into the stadium and install them would have been about halfway through the season. So I'm not sure what they had done the first half without any lights, but that would have been interesting. But they were just trying to move around. They couldn't find a home. Wheeler started to run out of money. He finally settled on Norfolk, Virginia, and went down there. He was going to use Foreman Field in Norfolk. Not a really big sports area. They had the Virginia Squires, which weren't doing all that great in the ABA, but they really had no other major league team. They had the Norfolk Neptunes, who played minor league football, but as far as a major league area, it really wasn't one. They started, that was their next stop. They were going to go there. They were going to play in Norfolk. They were going to be the Virginia Ambassadors, changed from the Washington Ambassadors. And then by then, again, Wheeler's starting to run out of money. He's really looking for a buyer. Davidson knows he's going to have a buyer. They go to
let's back up for a second. So Wheeler's already looking to get out right before a team is even sort of on the field and or domiciled.
Yeah, I mean he just didn't have the money. He didn't get the backers that he wanted. He really didn't have the money that he needed, that anybody needs to finance a football team. Is a huge undertaking, as you well know. You've got players, you've got front office, you've got uniforms, you've got all this stuff, you've got leasing on stadiums, you've got, everything that you got to pay money for that takes a huge outlay of money, and he just didn't have it. He thought he could do it with smoke and mirrors like a lot of these guys in the WFL did, and he just couldn't, because of the fact you have...
I mean, interrupt. So how does... Based on your investigation, how does somebody like Davidson find a guy like Wheeler who I don't even know what his source of income was or what his background was in terms of how he could even position himself as being financially well off enough to get a new football team off the ground?
He was I can't think of what he was. He was kind of a biologist. He had some kind of marine biology business that he had, that I guess he just, again, hustled Davidson and said he had enough money to do this. But another thing was that, again, you had a really bad time in American business. We had a recession going on at the time, and it started in 73. A lot of people did not have, disposable income, whether they were fans, whether they were owners. So you really had a really limited amount of people that you could check on as far as being in the, prospective owners in the league, because of the fact that it was just a really bad time financially in the country, with all the, a lot of the different things going on with the recession, they called it, the stagflation, they called it. Everything was just kind of working against him at the time. But he just, I guess, hustled Davidson, said, "Yep, I can do this." And like I said, it was a guy by the name of E. Joseph Wheeler, who had a marine biology business that said that he was 48 years old, marine biology and engineering company, and he said he was going to bring a team to Washington, D.C. Again, had trouble with that because of the fact that the Redskins had an exclusive lease on RFK Stadium. They couldn't get in there. They finally did say that they were going to have to pay an exorbitant amount if they wanted to, which he was not going to pay. But one of the front office guys called Wheeler the George Plimpton of the club owning set. He thought the guy was kind of sincere, but he just didn't have the money. He just didn't have the wherewithal to stay. This front office official said, he had a chance to get out at one point. He had a $5 million offer for basically at the time a non-existing franchise to sell it and make a big profit. But this guy, Wheeler, thought he was sitting on a $10 million property, and instead of jumping out with an enormous profit at the time, with a guy that may have had the financial money to be able to fund the team, he kept him. And, the rest is history, as he tried to, again, move from Washington, then down to Annapolis, then to Norfolk. So he just did not have the money.
It seems like the modus operandi was to kind of like, okay, D.C. itself's not going to work, so let me see if I can look in the regional Washington, D.C. area and extending that boundary a bit more, which is, I guess, where Norfolk sort of came into play. Perhaps also with the fact that the Squires of the ABA, Earl Foreman's basketball team there, at least had some kind of, professional credibility, so to speak. But it didn't work out in Norfolk either, right? I mean, but this is also the time. Well, so, okay, it's really important to sort of set this up, because this is also the time a very crucial player in all of this comes into play. Is this guy Jack Pardee, right? So is this around the time where Jack Pardee is hired as coach? Was he online to be the coach when they were in D.C. as well, or did that not happen until Norfolk, or how and when did he come into the picture, Pardee?
Jack Pardee came in right at the end of January. The team was still in Washington. There's a picture of him with Wheeler holding what would have been the prototype Washington Ambassadors helmet, which was white with a football-shaped logo on the side with a big W that had the Capitol building in the background. Kind of looked like the old Washington Senators logo from the 50s and 60s, that type of thing. And, yeah, he was in there, but he was the guy who really added some stability to the franchise. He really got him going in the right direction. He knew what he was doing. Or even from that point, even just having retired from football in 72 and worked as a year as an assistant coach with George Allen, he had the wherewithal to get this franchise, at least personnel-wise, started in the right direction to where they could start to actually exist as a franchise. He really was the big hiring that they had. I guess they went for Johnny Unitas at first. Unitas didn't want to get his hands on that train wreck, so he turned them down, and they went to Pardee, which to me was probably the best thing they ever did, was hiring Jack Pardee. He was the one that every player that would tell me or I've read about just said he was the man who kept the team together, and probably was one of the all-time coaching jobs, him, keeping that team competitive, and not only together and not only still playing when they could have just said, the heck with this, we're gone, we're out of here, we're not getting paid, we don't want stay around. They not only stayed, they also were competitive and did a very good job.
Well, this was, I think, his first ever head coaching job, right? After having played his last couple of years with the Redskins locally as a player, right?
Oh, yeah. This was his first one. Like I said, he had retired in 1972 from playing, and then he went a year coaching with George Allen. He was a very big George Allen disciple, liked a lot of, veteran players. When he went to sign players, he signed a lot of veteran players. And a lot of defensive players, especially the defense was very laden with veteran players, guys that had been around a while. And I think that, him being there, him being the coach and the general manager really, really helped that franchise. If he's not there, I don't even know if it even gets off the ground.
All right, so what I'm trying to do is sort of, parallel sort of the on-field buildup of the team under Jack Pardee and the off-the-field issues around where the hell this team's actually going to start and play. Let's return to Norfolk. What's going on there? It seems like a stadium had been found, but it still seems to figure that it's not going to. It seems to me that not only is the stadium and the market not fully embracing of the chance of a team, but also it seems like there's some cold feet finally in the ownership box.
Oh yeah. By this time, everybody knows I think the mayor of Norfolk said this guy he had everything to be an owner except money. That was the only thing he was really lacking, was that if he would have been able to, if he had that, everything would have worked out. But it was just the idea that it was one of these smoke and mirror type of guys who came in. The city was happy to see them at first. They had a 24,000 seat stadium. They might have probably filled it. They worked out a great lease with it. They had everything, stadium, police, ticket takers, improved lights, rebuilt press box, locker rooms, and a practice site for $255,000, excuse me, and they wanted $100,000 up front, and Wheeler just didn't have it. He didn't have the money. He couldn't pay it. He wouldn't pay it, and that's what pretty much put the kibosh on Virginia, was that he wouldn't even put any more money into it. And at that time, I'm sure, even though it didn't look good, like we talked about with the AAF, things are already starting to go south even before the season starts. And I think that he went to Davidson and said, I've got to get out of this. I don't have the money for it. We've got to find somebody to take this franchise off my hands. So I think that's what it was going, again, probably around the middle of February, March, that time frame. And that's, again, pretty early in the whole thing.
So what happens next? Do you think Davidson's just having alarm bells, or is this kind of standard procedure in the first couple of months of the WFL's existence? It seems like it's probably more common maybe that he was letting on, Davidson.
No, I think it was. I agree 100%. I think that was a problem everywhere. We had, from every team, they had teams changing locations, team changing owners. It was just a time when I think Davidson just was, okay, here we got another crisis. Okay, what are we going to do with this one? Instead of, the alarm bells, he just said, okay, what do we do here? And when Wheeler said, I got to get out, and this was in early May, he said he was going to finalize it, but he would not do that because he was did not have the money. That he was supposed to pay another $90,000, and he would not pay it. He said he just didn't have the money. So Davidson and I think it was Davidson that contacted Rommie Loudd, who had been the first African-American member of a front office with the Patriots back in the 60s. And he had tried to get an NFL team for Orlando when they were going to expand. And he had a group that he said wanted to have a team in Orlando, but they picked Tampa and Seattle and passed Orlando by. So he was looking to get a team, said he had the money. So they went to him. He took over the franchise in early May. And by this time, the guys are starting to get into training camp. They're having camp near Norfolk, which is where they were going to have it in the first place anyway. But they were, it's getting to be crunch time now. I mean, you're talking getting into because the season is going to start a little bit earlier than the NFL. They were going to start in early July. So the time was running out. They needed somebody. So he said, I'll take it over, move it to Orlando. They called it, it was going to be the Florida Suns at first, but they had another team, the Southern California Sun, and said, no, you can't call it that because we already have a Sun name. So they changed it to the Florida Blazers at the time. But they had Loudd said he had the Tangerine Bowl, which at the time was not the palatial facility it is now. It's huge now, but at the time it only had about 18,000 seats, which really is probably more minor league than major league at the time. But they Loudd said he was going to expand it. He made promises which he didn't keep, obviously. At the time, said, yeah, I'm going to make pump money into this, make the Tangerine Bowl a great place. But it just never happened. And it was just the idea that at least Wheeler was out. He had it off his hands. Davidson had solved his problem, so now they could move forward, such as it is with Loudd now at the helm, and the team now in Orlando.
So, was any profit made on the sale or the transfer of that franchise, or was that just was it kind of just making the original Wheeler investment whole, or what? And frankly, where was Rommie Loudd getting this money as well? Because as we'll talk about, he wasn't necessarily a font of funds either.
No, he wasn't either. He really wasn't. I don't know if Wheeler ever made an actual profit. I've read some places that did. Some places said he didn't. He just wanted it off his hands. He might have made a small profit, but again, he was another guy doing it with smoke and mirrors. I talked to several of the players I talked to, and I've read stories about what their recollections were. It was just, again, another idea of just saying we've got money, giving the leadership of the WFL the idea that, yes, I've got money and I can run this team, when in actuality they didn't. And unfortunately, this was a thing across the WFL, as we talked about earlier. This wasn't an isolated incident. This wasn't an isolated occurrence. The whole league had problems with this. Again, instead of really checking the owners, the prospective owners, Davidson just said, okay, you say you got the money. All right, we'll go ahead and you can have a team. So it just made things worse, just made things a mess, starting out the league and getting it started.
Well, it also seems that the Jacksonville franchise owner was not necessarily happy about having a team so close to Jacksonville in Orlando.
No, he was not. Fran Monaco was very upset. He had gone in there with the Jacksonville team. He was not happy that they were infringing on his territory. He wanted some money, and they made a settlement where he was supposed to pay him money. I don't know if they ever got it. I think he might have got part of it. I don't think he ever got the full amount. I think it was close to $1 million that he asked for to settle with it. But I don't think Monaco ever got very much of his money. There was a couple of deadlines that came and passed that the money was still not there. Monaco never got it. Again, the whole thing with Wheeler, whether or not he made a profit sometimes, and some places it said he made a huge profit of $2 million. Others say he made about a $50,000 profit. So it's just all kind of conjecture in a lot of places. A lot of times, Loudd got this gentleman, David Williams, to help him out. He was kind of the big investor. He had Holiday Inns, a chain of Holiday Inns down in the area. So he actually, then he put up the team's offices in one of his Holiday Inns. But they just had trouble from the beginning down in Orlando. It just was not going to be any better there than it had been in Washington or Annapolis or Virginia.
Was there any, in your research, was there any understanding of why Loudd's organization, when they were bidding for the NFL franchise, was unsuccessful? Because in many respects, right? People have to sort of remember, circa 1973, 74, Orlando, Disney World had literally just kind of opened up or had gotten off the ground a bit, and this was hardly the hub, it is population and business-wise it is today. This would have been, had they been successful in the NFL expansion round, and then now having inherited or gotten this WFL franchise, the first true professional franchise in sports in the United States in the Orlando area.
Yeah, I really think that they were not impressed with him. They rejected him as an expansion franchise. He made some comments at the time about the area, about possibly. He claimed for a long time during the season and even after the season that there was a lot of racial overtones. That's why he didn't get the NFL team and then the WFL team didn't get a real help from the city of Orlando. But he again made promises to the NFL that the NFL just didn't buy into. They didn't think that he had the money. Again, unlike Davidson, the NFL did its homework. Looked at him, didn't think that they had enough money to run an NFL team. They didn't have a real good facility. Again, the Tangerine Bowl sat around 18,000 at the time. The NFL's not going to move into a place that has an 18,000 seat stadium. So he, I don't think he really had a chance. I don't think that because of the fact he didn't have a facility, whereas Tampa had their stadium and Seattle had the Kingdome. You had stadiums there, whereas the Orlando just didn't have that major league size stadium that the NFL was looking for. And again, he made some, he had some questionable backing. There was, again, they did the background checks. The NFL did, is not like the WFL. They said that some of the people in his group were kind of shady, kind of not on the up and up as far as whether they were, had the money. So he was rejected by the NFL, and then, but Davidson was just kind of desperate at this time because you had a team that had started out, and you needed to get it off Wheeler's hands, and he needed to do anything. And Loudd stepped in and said, "I'll do it." He said, and I guess he just figured anybody is better than nobody. So that's how I got into Orlando.
Well, it was also around the time that the local folks in Orlando were working towards building out the Tangerine Bowl into arguably what it's become today, which is, I guess it's now known as the Camping World Stadium. But essentially it is that's been the host of now with the Orlando Citrus Bowl, et cetera. Right. So at least it seems like there was a bit of momentum, right? But it's interesting too, because from what I understand, the actual expansion and upgrading of that stadium, from what you described it, was itself almost a fiasco because construction issues and engineering issues and all that kind of stuff seemed to bedevil this situation, or just around the time the team's coming to play at WFL football.
Yeah, I mean, they added some bleachers. They were carrying chairs up to the press box during the first game for people to sit in. They were putting in new goalposts at the day before the game. The guy was putting them in, and one of the team officials said, "How long is your work guaranteed for?" And he goes, "As long as I drive my truck off the premises. That's it." So. You had one of the guys said, "Well, maybe we can prop it up with 2x4s." Unfortunately, he was ignored. But it was just a mess. It really was. They'd had a minor league team for years, the Panthers there. But minor league teams, they're a little bit different from the NFL or the WFL or any kind of major league team, and they themselves lost money every year when they even played there. Even though they won a couple of championships in Orlando, they lost money. Quite a bit of money every year, and they didn't draw that well. They didn't even fill 18,000 seats. So that was, again, a thing that was against them, that, even a minor league team couldn't fill the stadium. But again, Loudd got everybody convinced that he could do it. He could change everything. And like you said earlier, Disney World had just opened. It was a booming kind of an area, but it just didn't have the facility. It didn't have the money. And, it was just an idea that, it was a bad idea from the beginning. It just was not going to work, and it didn't. And again, not doing the background checks and finding out if these owners were really in it for the long run, or if they were just kind of shady characters that were just looking to maybe, have a franchise and then selling it at a big profit.
This stuff continues to fascinate me. All right, so let's dial up the fascination and go back to the other side of the football, shall we say? So we're looking now, I guess, around May 74 or so, and there's less than 2 months, I guess, until the WFL is getting open, and the team is now domiciled in Orlando, for better or for worse. But take us back to a training camp in Jack Pardee. Team hadn't moved really yet, at least on the field, right? Weren't they still practicing and getting the team ready and drafted, et cetera, still up in Virginia? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, they were signing players when they were still in Virginia. They had again, training camp was opening up. They had Pardee signed a lot of veteran players. He was like George Allen, a disciple of George Allen. Loved the veteran players. They didn't make mistakes, but Pardee had the smarts enough. He wasn't quite the adverse to rookies as Allen was, and he had quite a few rookies there on his team as well, kind of like Tommy Riemann, led the league in rushing. You had Greg Latta, who was a tight end who played for the Bears after he played at WFL. He was a solid player. You had quite a few guys. The defensive backfield. The defense was a lot of veterans that he had signed. They had Larry Grantham had come out of retirement. He was an original New York Titan. He was kind of like their coach on the field. The defensive backfield had W.K. Hicks, Billy Hayes, a lot of guys who'd been around a lot. He liked the veterans. He had signed a lot of veterans. They, like the other WFL teams, they tried to sign some of these future contract players. They signed Bob Davis, their quarterback, to a future contract. He was playing for the Saints. Their big signing was Bill Berge, who Pardee loved because, again, he was a defensive player, middle linebacker. He said he was kind of an equal to Dick Butkus before his knees went out. He was very happy to have him, but they defaulted on a payment to him. One of the bonus checks that they were supposed to sign, again, showing that Loudd just did not have the backing that he needed. They defaulted on a payment to Berge. His contract was negated before he even went to play for the team, and he went back to the NFL. So, again, even before the season started, you're seeing signs of trouble, signs of problems, signs of financial issues that they would experience the whole way through the season.
Can you remind our audience what this futures contract situation was like with the WFL? It's my understanding that this was sort of the way by which, in addition to the college players and the, shall we say, NFL castoffs, they would literally try to go for the jugular, if you will, and try to find top-notch NFL talent by trying to convince them to ultimately switch teams and leagues.
Yeah, I think that started with Bassett, John Bassett, up in. It started in Toronto. That was the time he was centered in Toronto before he moved to Memphis. And at the end of March, he signed the Miami Three, the Big Three, Larry Zonka, Jim Kick, and Paul Warfield, to future contracts. When their contracts with the Miami Dolphins would run out at the end of the '74 season, then they could come and play for the Southmen, they were called, in '75, because their contracts would have been out. So once that started, that made a lot of headlines, a lot of positive vibes for the WFL, and the other owners decided to join the crowd, and it was just a mad rush to sign players. Birmingham signed Kenny Stabler. They signed Jethro Pugh and Rayfield Wright. Teams were signing players left and right that to these future contracts, that once their contract ran out, with the NFL team, then they could join their WFL teams. Curly Culp, who ended up in the Hall of Fame, he signed with Southern California. Daryl LaMonica signed with Southern California. So they would sign these guys, making themselves look like, hey, these guys mean business. They've got the wherewithal, again, doing it with smoke and mirrors. And a lot of these contracts wound up being defaulted because they could not make the bonus payments. Stabler's was that way, almost every one of them. Ted Hendricks had signed, I think, with Jacksonville. His contract was null and void again because they missed payments on bonuses, that kind of thing. And again, it happened with Orlando, with the Blazers, with Berge. And they had a couple other guys that they'd signed again that they were not able to play. Fred Hoagland, who was a center for the Browns, they had signed him to a future contract. His contract was null and void. So it looked like a great idea at the time because it gave them headlines, it gave them a positive outlook, gave the football fans and the public a lot of idea that, hey, these guys mean business, these guys have the money. But in the end, it just really, because of the fact they had to pay these bonuses and the attendance wasn't good enough, the money coming in wasn't good enough to even run their own team, they're also paying these exorbitant bonuses to these players, which they couldn't pay. So again, it was just another thing that looked good at the time, but again, was another thing that just led to the league eventually folding in 75 just because of just a lack of funds.
All right, well, let's talk about arguably the star player for the Blazers that was obviously starting to make a name for himself already from the sort of, I guess, the Netherlands of the late rounds of the NFL draft, Tommy Riemann. Who's this guy?
Well, yeah, Tommy Riemann was from Missouri. They thought he was a little bit too small. They didn't know if he would make it or not. I think he was drafted by Pittsburgh, I believe. Pittsburgh they cut him, I believe, at some point in early on. I think he was drafted in 73. I'm not sure, but he was a small guy. He wasn't a very big running back at the time. Big running backs were a little bit more in vogue back then. Fullbacks like Zonka, but he was fast. He was really turned out. He turned himself around. Yeah, they thought he may have had a questionable attitude. He didn't show any of that in Orlando. He was a top-notch citizen. The poor guy had to eat at McDonald's. They had vouchers for McDonald's. He said, I ate McDonald's 3 times a day the whole time, the whole season. He goes, I'll never eat at a McDonald's again. But he had a good attitude. He loved the party. Party loved him. The other players got along with him. I'm not sure where he got the reputation for having a bad attitude, but he didn't show any of that in Orlando. He started out the season on the bench, actually. Didn't even start the season as a starter. They had Jim Strong, who was, again, a fullback, as one of them, and A.D. Whitfield, who had played around the NFL, bounced around for quite a few years. Again, that idea of veterans. But Party gave him a chance as the season wore on, and he just started running. He never stopped running, and I think it's like something like 1,576 yards. He led the league and was just a top-notch player and really helped the team as not only a running back but as a receiver coming out of the backfield, and just really, even though he was a rookie, was kind of one of the leaders of the team.
So how does the season start to unfold? Because I think surprisingly, given all the financial instability that we're talking about, the numerous franchise location shifts and ownership changes and all that kind of stuff, the league finally kicks off in July, and in many respects, Florida starts to kind of really start to dominate in their play in the early goings, despite all those distractions. Oddly,
no, you're exactly right. Like you said, with the distractions, they didn't get paid for their first game until after they played their second game. So again, that money thing started right at the beginning. Their defense carried them pretty much the whole season. It really started out. They opened the season with 3 wins. Then they lost to Houston, but then they came out and won 3 more games. They beat Chicago, which at the time was one of the hottest teams in the league. Everybody thought they were going to lose to them. They beat them 46-21, and a lot of it was the special teams, which, again, like George Allen, Pardee was a big special teams guy. He had a special teams coach, but again, at the time, a lot of NFL teams didn't even have special teams coach, but he was very much into that. That was an important part of the game too. They won some games with block kicks, interceptions, run backs. Their kick return guys were great. Rod Foster was a rookie from Harvard. was a great kick returner. They had some other good guys that were, could return kicks and did it very well. So they were good on the special teams. They're good on defense. The offense was kind of one of those lunch bucket kind of offenses where they weren't really flashy. I mean, they had Riemann, who was really a good running back. But Bob Davis was the quarterback. He did get out of his contract with the Saints, and instead of starting in 75, he actually wound up playing for the team in 74. He was a solid veteran. He backed up Namath at the Jets. He'd played with the Saints. He'd bounced around for a while. But he was a solid veteran, had a good arm. He was a good leader. People believed in him, and he was good on the field with the team. So it was a team that they stuck together. They had a good attitude. They had some good leaders on the field, again, like Larry Grantham on defense, Larry Ely, who was another linebacker, Mike McBath, who had played since the 60s with the Bills and a couple other teams. They had these defensive veterans, and not so much on offense. They had quite a few, actually, rookies on offense, which is surprising, again, because Pardee was such a disciple of George Allen. He wouldn't start a rookie if somebody put a gun to his head, I don't think. But Pardee at least believed in some of the rookies and was willing to use them. But yeah, they kept winning. They lose a game here or there, and it was very close. The games they lost they didn't get blown out. They lost to Memphis by like 8 points, Birmingham by 1 point, and again 1 point to the which is kind of still embarrassing to some of the players if you ask them. They were the team that the Detroit Wheels won their only game from. So they don't like to look at that kind of as a positive because of the fact it was just that was their only victory of the whole season. But they were a consistent winner. Again, if they lost, it wasn't by much, but they were a very solid team. Very good on defense. Again, just a very workmanlike on offense. It wasn't a flashy offense like some of the teams in the WFL, like the Philadelphia with King Cochran, and some of the other teams that used a lot of different sets and wild offenses. They just basically just ran the ball, passed when they had to, and they found success with it. They were very good at that.
All right, so enlighten me and us, our audience, into sort of what's going on with paychecks and the business of the franchise, right? Because it's remarkable how well this team did on the field, given the difficulties it seems that players had in terms of getting paid and/or promissories for such. Can you give a little bit more specificity as to who truly was getting paid and not? Because my understanding is that Tommy Riemann in later years even mentioned that, or at least suggested that he didn't get paid at all for the entire season until his co-MVP check came from the league itself. Now, that's curious to me. How do you live for months without getting paid whatsoever, if that's true? But it's clear that some people were getting paid and maybe others were not. Or how is that sort of playing out?
Well, some of the guys wanted their money deferred. They had the bonus money that they got. They signed maybe a bonus up front. Riemann was one of those guys. He wanted his money deferred, so he didn't actually get a check. You were right. He didn't get a paycheck, and that's why he was eating McDonald's 3 times a day. And he was using his bonus money to pay rent, and there was quite a few players that did that. But the guys who did, they got paid for about the first 6-7 weeks of the season. The paychecks were, a little bit late here and there, but they did get paid. But then finally they got to a point where it was like the 7th week of the season, and Chuck Beatty, who I talked to and interviewed for the book, said that he went to the bank. The bank looked at his check, went back behind the wall there, and then came back out and then had stamped NFS on it, insufficient funds. He says he still has the check because they just had no money to pay the players. Starting with that 7th game, they had gotten some of their paychecks. Again, some of them had them deferred to the end of the season, which they never got, obviously, because they, didn't have any money. It was just the idea that a lot of the guys that I talked to said, yep, I remember that day. it was the day when I come in and I try to cash my check, and there was insufficient funds. And after that, they didn't get anything. Like you said, Riemann got his money for the co-MVP, got that actually cold cash. They didn't even have a check because they figured with the checks, the way they were bouncing left and right in WFL, they gave them cold cash right out of a Brinks truck pulled up under the field and gave the three guys their money in cash. It was I think it was like $3,000 each or something like that. So, and so I mean, it was like at one point during when all this money was not coming in and they were not getting paid, they got like $200 for a beer commercial that they almost cried because they actually had some money. So it was just amazing, that these guys again stayed together. Party kept them together, and they all credited him. Everybody I talked to, everybody I read about, credited Party with their success because he was the one and he wasn't lying to them. He wasn't saying things are going to get better. He goes, I don't know when your next paycheck's going to be here. I don't know if you're ever going to get paid, but if you want to, show yourself as a good player, if you want to, sign with another team next year or the year after, you're going to have to play and play well. And that's the best thing to do is just concentrate on football. Let's try to forget about all these other things going on. And that's what they did. It was amazing how he was able to convince them of that. It was kind of and again, being a disciple of George Allen, the us against them kind of a mentality that he put into these players that said, it's us against the world. We're stuck without getting paid, but we're not going to let it get us down. We're going to be out there. We're going to win, and we're going to try to win every game. We're going to play every game, and nobody. I think we wound up a couple of players left. It wasn't very many. It was a couple of them finally toward the end of the season. Finally, it had enough because they just hadn't been paid for so long. But Party was able to convince all the other guys that let's keep going. Let's see if we can't win this thing, and they just about did.
All right, we're going to take a quick, brief pause, and we want to remind you that our friends at Audible are offering to you, our listeners, an opportunity to get a free audiobook download from their amazing array of over 190,000 titles to choose from. When you go to audibletrial.com/goodseats, and that's the place to go to get your free audiobook download, courtesy of us and Audible. And it's something you can cancel at any time, and you can keep the book for as long as your device exists. And like I said before, there's just a ton of choices available to you to burn up that free credit, including a bunch in the realm of our forgotten sports little genre here, including in the realm of basketball. If you fancy yourself a fan of the old ABA, for example, two great books on the great Julius Erving that might be worth using your credit for. One, of course, is the Rise and Rise of Julius Erving. It's called Doc, and it's written by Vincent Milazzi and narrated by David Cromet. You could use your credit for that book, and it's a great sort of interview style background on the life and times of Dr. J from all sides. But if that's not good enough for you, why not try the autobiography? It's called Dr. J, the Autobiography, of course. It's written by Dr. J in concert with Carl Greenfeld. And it's narrated by Dr. J himself, Julius Erving. And you could use your credit for that book, as well as, like I said, thousands and thousands of other books, not just only in basketball and basketball history, but in a whole host of genres and topics. By all means, give them a try. Why don't you? It's risk-free, for God's sakes. audibletrial.com/goodseats. Yes, audibletrial.com/goodseats. That's the link. And that's where you're going to get your free audiobook download. Again, you can cancel at any time. And once you do download that book for free, and after you cancel it, if you choose to do that, it's yours to keep. So you can enjoy in perpetuity, for as long as your device lives, the downloaded book free and gratis, courtesy of yours truly here at Good Seats, still available, and our friends at Audible. Thank you, Audible. We appreciate it. And we appreciate you joining our conversation once again. So there's a clip there out on in YouTube land of the World Bowl game, which we'll get to very shortly, that features a clip from just after the Blazers' unexpected, I think, victory over the Memphis Southmen in the semifinals to get them into the World Bowl with a player named Louis Ross. And it's very emotional. I guess Ross was on the special teams unit and was instrumental in, I think, blocking a kick or something to allow the team to sort of move on. But it feels to me like a lot of his emotion was almost incorporating of all of the off the field stuff and the lack of payment and the camaraderie that Pardee had kind of, instilled and kept together. Despite all of that.
This is a guy to credit with the failed field goal attempt. He blocked it, and looking at the size at you, Lou, I understand why. What was your thought? To harass him or really to block it?
Try to block it. That was my biggest goal, trying to block the field goal.
Why?
I'd like to say one thing. I just want to thank God for this. God, I prayed before the game, and I thought it was a good win for us.
All right. Well, Lou, I'm sure you express the sentiments of his teammates. There's no question about it.
No, I would agree with you 100% on that. I do believe that just all the emotion coming out. He was the one that they had fallen behind Memphis in that playoff game, 15-0. Bob Davis got hurt. He was their leader all year. The only player they had to replace him was a rookie named Buddy Palazzo, who had hardly played all year. The team just buckled their chin straps, as the old saying goes, and just kept at it. They went ahead 18-15. Memphis drove back down the field. They looked like they were going to tie it with a kick and send it into overtime. And Louis Ross broke through, blocked the kick. He just started running down the field, and people were mobbing him. And they said that he was wearing a jersey that had holes in it because they couldn't afford to fix the holes in his jersey. And, I've seen that clip. He was a very emotional player. He was a guy they got from the Canadian Football League at the beginning of the year. Loudd had to fly up to Toronto and try to get him out of his CFL contract, and he joined the team, and he was a very emotional leader. He'd been around for a while again, and one of those guys that bounced around the NFL, played for the Bills, played for a couple other teams, and and I think that just all that emotion came out from all that, the entire, nobody gave him a chance against Memphis. They thought, they had set it up to where the three division winners, which the Blazers were one of, should have had first week buys, but they had the Blazers playing the first week like they wanted to get rid of them. And that's what the team thought. They thought, well, these guys want to get rid of us. They don't want us winning. So they had to play Philadelphia in their first round game. Whereas Memphis, for some reason, got a bye even though they finished second. Or Birmingham got a bye in the first round. And so they just thought it was unfair how they were being treated. Again, it was that us against the world kind of mentality that Pardee drilled into them, that George Allen had drilled into him when he was with the Redskins. It was just that idea that we're the only people that are for us are us. And let's just go out and show them what we can do and prove them wrong.
It just feels to me like it is just the epitome of dysfunction when you put all of it together, including what I understand is that Rommie Loudd was I guess publicly even hinting, even 6-7 weeks into the season, that they just may move the franchise altogether to Atlanta. So I mean, how does that keep spirits up?
Yeah, that was the thing. They were going to move them to Atlanta. They were going to play at Georgia Tech's Grant Field. They thought they had an agreement with a couple of guys up there. Again, they didn't produce any money. Loudd went to the extreme of calling the Tangerine Bowl a pig pen. He didn't endear himself to too many people down there. Again, he looked at it as being racially motivated. I'm not sure. Everybody I talked to and everybody I read about said he used that as a crutch where he just didn't have the money to fund the team and to run the team. They were going to move to Atlanta. That was around the 6th, 7th week of the season, but that fell through. So again, you've got all these things going on. Where are we going to play? Are we going to play here? Are we going to be in Orlando? Are we going to be in Atlanta? Or are we going to exist? And, that's going to wear on you I look at it myself. Am I going to keep working when I'm not getting paid? No matter where I'm working. And football is a tough game to play for free. It's really a physically demanding sport and a job, whereas, you're working at your job, you're not getting paid for 13 weeks, and you're expected to still be, doing a top-notch job, whereas you can't pay your bills, you can't, buy groceries, whatever it might be. It's just amazing how these guys still hung in there despite all these distractions, was just amazing to me, and it still is.
Yeah, I mean, I see various quotes from Pardee basically saying it's very difficult to concentrate on football when you have so many rumors of the franchise moving or not. So what's going on with the ownership group, right? I mean, it's not just Loudd, but it's also his Mr. Holiday Inn guy behind the scenes. And I mean, so how is he keeping this all together? Because it seems like it's just unraveling from the seams.
Yeah, I mean, he the players would all say, we never saw the guy. He would show up with a couple of bodyguards, Loudd, I mean. He would show up and try to, buoy their hopes, but he really, they could tell he really wasn't honest with them. David Williams, he was looking to get out, the guy from the Holiday Inn. He kicked them out of the Holiday Inn. Their offices were kicked out of the Holiday Inn. He was backing off of his involvement in the franchise at this time. This was getting toward the latter part of the season. And it was just really falling apart. It was, like you said, dysfunctional from the word go. It really was. It was just a team that just had, if it could go wrong, it did go wrong for them. I mean, just everything. Not a day went by that there was some kind of a crisis. There was some kind of a problem going on that they had to deal with. The coaches were trying to keep their spirits up because they're going through a lot of the same things. They're not getting paid. Pardee was not getting paid. He had some money saved, thank goodness, that he could get through. But he's trying to keep these guys up while on the same time he's going through issues himself because he's not getting paid. His wife, I guess, at one time went to a store to buy some groceries. The manager there saw who it was, followed her home, and grabbed the groceries out of her hand and took them back to the store because he didn't think her check was going to pass and it was going to bounce. So she couldn't even buy groceries there at the local store, because of the fact that they had such a reputation by that time that the team was just not going to make it. The team didn't have any money. Anybody who showed you a check it was going to bounce. It was not going to pass. And there was a guy that said that, he couldn't even get work done on his car because of the fact, people couldn't pay their bills. It was just one, trial and tribulation on top of another. It was just amazing. As again, I went into this and researched it, full time and really looked at it from all these different angles. It was just a mess, but it was just amazing how they did that. Again, there's plenty of stories in the WFL and in any rival league where you've got hardships and you've got problems and you've got issues, where a team may go 4-10 or 5-9, but here's a team that went 13-7, won 13 out of 20 games, won 2 playoff games, and almost won the championship. But not getting paid, just being there and being for each other and saying, we're just going to do this, we're going to show them. And that's what they did.
Yeah, where was the league in all of this, right? It seems like the league was starting to get worried and worse, which I can imagine as stories around, I don't know, I see here the wide receiver Hubie Bryant not being able to pay his paper boy, and Jim Strong having his phone shut off and sending his wife and son back to Houston to live, and meals getting paid for by the booster club.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was just the booster club helped them out. Again, a lot of these guys had to go through a lot of problems every day. It seemed like, where they were trying to just live day to day. Mike McBath, I talked to him on the phone, and Mike told me that, again, I mentioned this earlier, that they're playing a game, they're looking out into the parking lot, and the repo man's there taking their cars out of the parking lot. And, you're dealing with that and you're trying to focus on a football game, try to win a football game when I'm not going to have a car when I get out of here. It's like, they went to shave after a game. They couldn't find a razor to shave after a game. It was just, parties buying toilet paper for the locker room. It was just an awful situation almost every day. And the league, they weren't really doing a whole lot. I mean, I don't know what their mindset was at the time. I think that, they probably made some promises to them, like Davidson did to a lot of franchises, said, yeah, okay, I'll have some checks for you. And they didn't really, I think they might have gotten a couple of checks from the league, but it was just nothing. It was just a pittance to what they should have been getting, to what they should have been getting, what they should have been paid as professional athletes, and they were just professional in name only. It was not something that they were really professional. They were pretty much either semi-pros or not pros at all.
So the league, though, resorted to even suing the team, right? And then there was a counter-suing that it just seemed like it devolved. And almost to the so explain this to me. It seems like Loudd, as the WFL was sort of closing in, almost kind of tried to pass the buck, literally and figuratively, to David Williams, his Holiday Inn backer, for apparently not living up to his promises of funding the team properly. It just seems like it's just a complete nightmare. And frankly, probably spilling over into the press as well at the time.
Oh yeah, no, there was stories every day in the Orlando Sentinel about things going on. Again, lawsuits. Williams wanted to back out. He said, "I've had enough. I just don't have the money to do this." They played their last home game in September, and they only played one home game after that because they just weren't drawing. So the league changed all their games to road games to where they could play, maybe get a few bucks at it, like say in Birmingham, which was drawing well, or Memphis, or Charlotte. But a lot of they only played one home game in the last I don't know, about 9 or 10 weeks of the season. All the other ones were shifted to away games so that they could try to make some money. But they weren't. They just weren't getting the money that they needed. Again, a lot of the WFL teams were going through the same thing, and I think the league itself was just overwhelmed by the fact that they had so many problems league-wide. I mean, they couldn't really focus on, say, like one team like the Blazers, if that was the problem spot. They had Detroit, they had Jacksonville, they had, New York. They had all these teams that were having financial problems, and I think they were just overwhelmed. I don't think they expected that. Plus the fact that Davidson admitted that he tried to use some of the tactics they used to, say, the WHA, where they would try to finance some teams, but that didn't work out. They should have just folded some of the teams early on and, drafted their players and that kind of thing, instead of trying to fund the teams. And it just got to be a domino effect to where almost every team was suffering at the gate, suffering on the field. And it wasn't the fact that, like I said, the Blazers were an isolated occurrence. It wasn't like, okay, we got the Blazers here, but the rest of the teams are doing well. Let's focus on the Blazers and try to prop them up. They had problems everywhere. And it was just, I think they just got overwhelmed at some point to where they said, probably just threw up their hands and said, let's just try to make it through the season as best we can at that point.
All right. As we sort of round the corner here, who's this Bob Prentice guy? Because it seems that a guy is coming in with a salvation plan come October. I don't know, who knows where this guy and his group sort of come into play, but apparently on one of the national television broadcasts, he's flashing a $1.5 million check that he's serious, I guess. It seems to me that there was it's not only sort of to save the team, but also, I guess, to be part of the renovations and or the upgrading of this Tangerine Bowl Stadium, which we sort of hinted at earlier.
Yeah, I mean, this guy, Bob Prentice, shows up. It's right before the Philadelphia game where they're going to play the Bell in the playoffs. Loudd had been looking for investors for months. He made all these promises he couldn't keep. Then they announced this guy, Bob Prentice. He showed up at halftime of the playoff game with the Bell. They had like you said, they had a TV conference live where this guy waving a check saying, "Hey," he was a Cocoa Beach banking investor who was going to help out with the Blazers because his kids like football. He was ready to pump $4 million into the team. He had some investors behind him, some guys from Cocoa Beach, some folks from the area. And he presented this check for $1.5 million to the general counsel, Bob Deutsch, or the Blazers on TV. pay off the debts and to pay off the 13 weeks of back pay. It was drawn on a corporation called TW Limited of Nashville. But when they went up after the Blazers had won that game, Deutsch went up to Nashville. Prentice said he all of a sudden got cold feet. He didn't want to. He was wondering whether or not he wanted to invest. Suddenly they started looking into it again. Yet another person who said he had money and he didn't, and he just did not have again, that money that he was promised was just empty promises again to this team that they got. They heard and had been hearing for months that yes, things are going to turn around. Here's another, silver lining in the clouds that's going to come along, just like any that we've been promised you for months. And again, Prentice was another one who was just another Shylock, another kind of a shyster, kind of a, yeah, okay, I've got this. They became, questions were being raised by the WFL Board of Governors. They began to grow suspicious of him and began asking questions, and he didn't have the answers, and if they did, he was the wrong answers. So he balked at closing the deal. He held up the procedures, would not, let his money go all of a sudden. So again, it was just another empty promise. So the Deutsch spent the whole week up at the Nashville bank trying to get the deal to go through, but it never did. And this was right before they were going to play Memphis. And as Matt Matzlowski said, we don't care about the money anymore. We're proud of ourselves and our coaches, and we're just going to do what we can to win and to be the best we can, because apparently we don't have an organization that we can be proud of. It's just us that are, it's playing for us. And, again, us against them. And Bob Davis, he was quoted as being, "We're mad. We're tired of this. We've heard of it all the time, over and over again. We're just going to finish the season because of pride." And it was just their pride that took them as far as it did, and with Pardee at the helm, drilling this into them, that's what got them through.
Yeah, the dichotomy is striking, right? Because while this latest deal to save the club is dissipating, you're setting now up the team for this game against Memphis. The Southmen were, Bassett owned probably one of the more model franchises, right? Had those three Miami Dolphins players sort of lined up for next season and made a lot of stir. And they also had the best record in the league, right? 17-3. They were favored to win the World Bowl. And it seems like the league probably wanted to see them succeed and be sort of the shining example of what could and was going right with the league. Not that there was a whole lot. But maybe you take us into that semifinal game and that clip that we sort of alluded to earlier. Incredible, right? That the Blazers would emerge victorious at Memphis against the best team in the league, and despite all of these financial difficulties.
Yeah, I mean, it was just the idea that the Blazers and Pardee was able to convince the team that they wanted Memphis and Birmingham to play in the World Bowl. They wanted, like you said, the model franchises in there to show them what was good about the league. And they thought they were being, basically screwed over by the league. They didn't want them in there. So Memphis comes in. They go to Memphis. They're ticked off because they didn't get paid when they were promised they were. Back in August, they had played Memphis, and Memphis had rolled up something like 250 yards rushing and had beaten the Blazers. They started off this game the same way. They went 55 yards in their first possession, scored a touchdown. They got their second possession. This time they went 74 yards in 4 plays and went up 15-0. And there's still 5 minutes left in the first quarter. It looked like they were just going to blow them out. But again, Bob Davis got hurt. And again, that even made things look worse. They'd already been outgained 232 yards to 91. Paul Villano, who was a defensive tackle, one of their top players, broke his arm. And then Bob Davis got hurt. Riemann wasn't doing very well. He kind of had an off first half. So again, they had this long-haired rookie from Southern Miss, Buddy Palazzo, who had spent 7 weeks on the taxi squad and had attempted 5 passes all year. He had hadn't played in 73. He was going to try out with the Saints in 74, but then he got signed by the Blazers. So here they come down. They're down 15-0. It's kind of like, I like to look at it as kind of like art imitating life, is when they made the movie The Best of Times, when Kurt Russell's team is down at the half to their big rival when they come back in the rain. It started to rain, which negated some of the speed of Memphis. It started to rain in the game. And you've got the Blazers, who are more of a plodding team, kind of like, just run it straight at them. That really worked to their advantage. They started to get control of the game. They were outplayed, in the first half, but then their defense started playing better. The ground game started picking up. Tommy Riemann started moving. As Larry Ely said, he was running like he was possessed. And they just started to come back. Their defense tightened up. They started holding Memphis. But they were still down. But then, like I said, Palazzo led the team back. They just pulled together like they had all year. And with very little time left, they went ahead 18-15 when Richard James swept around right end from 4 yards out to put the team up. And then it was about a little over a minute left. Memphis still could tie it, so they drove down the field from their 43 to the 24. They're out of timeouts, but they had one of their players fake an injury, which I remember that happening quite a bit back in the NFL back in the day. I think they made that illegal after at some point, but a player could fake an injury to stop the clock. So they stopped the clock with 7 seconds left, and they were going to try a field goal. Bob Etter, who had played for the Falcons and a couple other NFL teams, went to kick the ball, and again it was Louis Ross who broke in, got his arms up, blocked the kick just as the gun sounded. And once again, they had, as Larry Ely said, we beat Memphis, the World Football League, and the refs here tonight, and we beat their money. Anybody, Hubie Bryant said it's first time a few times in the history that anybody's beaten the system. And Bob Davis said we messed up the entire NFL. They were trying to get rid of us all season, but they can't, and they still had.
So, and it's amazing, right? And you saw the emotions in that clip. And so, all right, so then it's on to the World Bowl, right? And the league has got to be, and Davidson in particular, got to be apoplectic, I guess, that probably the most, one of the most challenged franchises is, despite all the odds, sort of screwing up the ideal World Bowl matchup.
Right.
But that said, though, that the Birmingham Americans, right, who they were going to face, right, one of the top teams in the league and obviously best franchises, were themselves no true paradigm, right? Because my understanding is that as the World Bowl, the lead up to it, right, it was almost like the battle of the unpaid teams, right? The Blazers hadn't been paid for, 12, 13 weeks, but the Americans had been floundering too. I think some of their players had been paid for 4 or 5 weeks going into that game.
Yep, you are absolutely right. I mean, it wasn't a case of, who had the worst, they were sentimental favorites because they had, the Blazers were sentimental favorites because of the greater deprivation, but Birmingham, had just as many problems, and theirs pretty much went back to those future contracts. They had signed so many of those over the course of the season, and they were paying out these exorbitant bonuses that the actual players themselves that were playing and some of the bills they had to pay weren't getting paid because they had to try to prop up this, and pay all these bonuses. So, yeah, they were not paid for the last 5 weeks of the season. They actually went on strike the week before the World Bowl and said, we're not going to play. They got them to play because they promised them World Bowl rings if they won. So they, and some of them, I think it took about 30 years for some of them to finally get their rings, but that's what they promised them because they went on strike. They were not going to do it. They weren't going to play. So they were just as bad off in some respects as the Blazers, and even though their attendance started out very well early in the summer, because of the fact that you had Alabama football and all that, and the fall in it, their crowds actually went down as the season went on. So they, again, because of the fact their attendance was going down, they're paying all these exorbitant funds to these players they've signed to future contracts. It really hurt their team. Going back to what I said earlier, at the time, the future contract signings looked great, made good headlines, made good publicity, but in the end, it really bit them in the butt because now they have to pay these guys these bonuses they had promised them, and they can't, and it really hurt the team, and it even hurt, like you said, a team that was as successful as Birmingham was.
Yeah, and we've talked about this in other episodes, right? The IRS agents basically standing and sitting on the sidelines as this game plays out because the Americans were in arrears in taxes, and the league not only wanted to, or the IRS, wanted to not only ensure that the crowd and the tickets were being sold properly, but also perhaps what ultimately happened was repossession of actual items and assets of the team after the game in an attempt to collect what had been past owed to them.
Yeah, I mean it was the IRS said, okay, we'll let you play the game, but we're going to get a certain cut of the receipts. And yeah, they were in the locker room as the Americans. They won the game 22-21. They were celebrating their victory, and the IRS agents are confiscating their helmets, their jerseys, and there were stories that guys were passing their stuff out to their wives out through the window so they could at least keep it as like a collectible, as a keepsake. But they were getting their uniforms repossessed right there in the locker room when they're celebrating winning the championship. So it was just one bad story after another. Even when they should be celebrating the league, when they should be celebrating the success of the league, that here's a team that won the championship, they have to deal with the fact that their uniforms are being repossessed in the locker room when they're celebrating their championship. So again, it was just that idea of bad publicity, bad news, just every day, every newspaper you read, every story. And again, a lot of that, I would say, goes back to the NFL. They weren't going to help them anyway because it's a rival league, and a lot of the newspapers, probably had been covering the NFL. They don't want this team to look good, so it could have been a little bit on that way that they really emphasized a lot of this negativity. But that a lot of it was justified. They just had a lot of negative news, a lot of negative aspects of the league that really made playing for the team and playing for the league hard and difficult. And again, that's what makes this story so great, is how Florida had overcome all these problems and overcome all these difficulties over the course of the season, and still almost won the championship, even though they were pretty much broke by the time that game was being played.
I'd love to see the entire version of that game. The clip that's sort of circulating out there on YouTube is only a part of the game because so a couple of different quick things. One, I mean, Birmingham rushed to a 22-0 lead early on, and it even seems like the game, and a ferocious comeback by the Blazers to get it to 22-21, including a 76-yard punt return for a touchdown, sort of as the game is sort of nearing its end, but not without controversy. And by the way, this was the game, by the way, where that $1.5 million check by Bob Prentice was shown during halftime of the broadcast, right? So clearly it seems like the team got some level of encouragement, not only to play the game for its own, for their own pride and their own team members, but also the fact that there's actually a glimmer of hope that this franchise will live on, given the entreaty of Prentice and friends with his check. But the controversy, though, on the field was Tommy Riemann scored a touchdown apparently in the first quarter that was nullified, and it looks like the television replay shows that he should have been in the end zone to actually have given Florida its first score, but in turn it turned into a touchback. And arguably, if that touchdown had been awarded in the Blazers' favor, we'd be talking about the ultimate capstone of a crazy season, with Florida being the champions, not Birmingham.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that really changed the, at least for the first half anyway, changed the momentum because the Blazers took the opening. They got their first They won the toss, were elected to receive. They drove 51 yards, all of it on the ground. Again, they had that kind of a grinding out offense. It wasn't a fancy offense. Jim Strong, Tommy Riemann are hammering away at the Americans' defense. Riemann ripped off one run of 24 yards. You got to the 5. Riemann started around the right end and dove for the end zone. And like you said, it looked like he had crossed the goal line, broken the plane, as they say, and before he fumbled the ball. But they called it a touchback. The ball went through it. Tommy Riemann said as he crossed the goal line, he was hit. He fell, the ball dropped to the ground and rolled out of the end zone. So the television replay, like you said, confirmed that he had scored, but the officials ordered a touchback. So again, that changed the complexion of at least the first half where they fell behind, because I think that, they were, it changed the momentum. They had that momentum. If they had scored that touchdown, like you said, it could have been a whole different ball game. It could have been a ball game where the Blazers were, get that early lead, take the crowd out of the game, and who knows where it would have went then. Like you said, it could have been a even more inspirational and amazing story than if they'd have won the game, especially on the road in Birmingham. But, it was just not to be. It was again, and, against that us against them kind of a mentality that, it seemed like everybody was against them. The whole world seemed to be against them. It's just us. But, Birmingham was a very good team. Did get that 22-0 lead. The Blazers, again, they had Bob Davis back. He was back from the injury. They came back and scored 21 points toward the end of the, I think all of them in the last quarter. Davis hadn't even completed a pass until the first play of the last quarter. And then he, like you said, they had that 76-yard punt return by Rod Foster, who took it on his own 24 and went all the way. And that brought them within 1 point. The difference in the game was that the Americans scored an action point, which was the extra point they used in the WFL. You couldn't kick it. You had to either run or pass for it. And the Blazers couldn't convert on any of their action points. That was really the difference in the game, was just that action point. But if they had that touchdown stand up at the beginning of the game, like you said, who knows? It could have been a completely different story, even more inspirational and more amazing that they would have won the championship after everything that happened to them.
All right, so let's finally talk about the aftermath then. After this game, in the weeks after, what happens to the magic check of Bob Prentice? What happens to the team? Give us a sense of sort of where it winds up. And I guess I'll give you a little hint here, or a little setup, that there was a great quote, I think it was in your book as well, that Billy Hobbs is one of the linebackers for the Blazers. In his frustration at the game's end, he's basically just lamenting how bad the call was of that denied Tommy Riemann touchdown. He's quoted as saying, "You don't just blow calls like that. The officiating is the worst part of the WFL. The officials are even worse than not getting paid." So the emotion, credit to the team, credit to Jack Pardee, credit to players like Hobbs and Riemann and Bob, all the others, right? Who stuck through all of this this craziness, and frankly would probably drive many people away far sooner than these guys sort of hung around for. But what happens sort of in the near term, right after the game, as well as in the days that followed with this team? Because it's a sad ending to a noble achievement, I guess, that arguably goes forgotten in sports history.
Yeah, that was a great quote by Hobbs. That really was. But yeah, right after the game, Davis went back to Orlando. Bob Davis, he, loaned some money to some more of his more destitute teammates so they could at least get home after the game. On December 9th, which is like 4 days after the game, some of the players said they might come back for a second season. This is how dedicated they were, how loyal they were to Jack Pardee to come back. They were even thinking about if they were going to be a team in the second year, they would come back. But the Bob Prentice thing never came about. The money just was not there. That was just again another broken promise for the team. Players are talking about how they lived off their bonuses. UB Bryant said he was owed over $17,000 in salary. They were talking about the check, the $1.5 million check that they finally checked it with the bank, and it bounced like a Super Ball. The TW Limited, the corporation that the check was written against, was a month-old corporation. So who knows what was going on with that. That seemed kind of shady right there, where you've got a TW, Limited, a corporation that are supposed to be, solvent, and they're like a month old, and their check bounces that they have, had written for the team that they want to help them out. One of the members of the group that they had, the Prentice's group, turned out to be an ex-convict who had been arrested for transporting stolen cars across state lines. On the 13th of December, they met in New York to try to talk about, what they're going to do with the team, seeing if they were going to give it, take it away from Rommie Loudd finally and give it to David Williams, but Williams really didn't want anything to do with it either. There was talk about moving the team to Akron, Ohio. There was talk about moving the team to Oklahoma City. There was all kind of different things going on right after the season, and the first few months after that, it turned out that the crowd was at the World Bowl was exaggerated. They didn't have quite as many as they thought they did. So the IRS didn't get as much money as they thought they would have, because they, again, which they had done earlier in the year. And I think what you probably know about is that earlier in the year, some of the teams had, falsified their attendance records. They even did it right up to the World Bowl. So, it was just, again, more bad news. It wound up that the Blazers themselves were finally kind of dissolved, but somehow they wound up being with a guy from San Antonio, Norm Bevan, who bought the rights to the team in March of 1975, and then that team turned out to be the San Antonio Wings that played in 1975. Loudd himself wound up being arrested for trying to sell cocaine. I guess that came about. He was trying to raise money for the team, and I guess in his effort to do that, he was trying to sell cocaine. He wound up doing that with an undercover agent, and he wound up spending some time in jail. So yeah, it was just even if the season was over, it still did not end. It just kept going and kept going, as far as bad news, as the negative news, as things that just continued to make the WFL look like it just wasn't what had been promised to the fans, to the public back in 73, early 74. This was going to be a solvent, an alternative to the NFL, and it really wasn't. It was just something that from the get-go was shady, and remained that day until October 22nd of 75, whenever it finally did this finally fold.
So I urge our listeners to listen to our not only our other episodes with Mark, which are help give sort of even fuller flavor of the WFL league wide and some of the other misadventures of some of the specific teams involved as well. But also it's a very sort of interesting kind of bookmark, I guess, around the perils of being a challenger league in established sports, and the road to sports success is littered with many sort of dead bodies and promises. What do you suspect? Did you ever? Here's the other question. Did you ever talk to Jack Pardee as part of your interviewing and sort of get a sense of where his head was at with his players and what sort of kept him so in the game, so to speak, and dedicated?
I did not. I wish I would have. I talked to quite a few of the players. He was not one of them I got a chance to talk to. I wish I had. He was just one of these guys. He was very stable. A guy who really looked out for his players. He had been a player himself. He knew what it was like on that side of the field. I think he was just one of these guys that, he commanded respect. He commanded loyalty just by his nature, by his the way he carried himself, the way he was, the way he did things. He was honest. Like I said earlier, he didn't try to make promises to the team that this was going to happen, this was going to happen. He said, I don't know when you're going to get paid, but let's keep playing and let's do the best we can and let's get there. And, you may be able to get signed by another team, maybe even in the NFL next year or the year after. So let's play as well as we can and keep going and keep playing for ourselves if nobody else. And that's what they did. It was just an amazing story from him. He just seemed like I mean, everybody I talked to and everybody I've read about, that was the guy who was given all the credit for the team, for the success of the team, that if it hadn't been for him, if they had had a coach that maybe wasn't quite as stable, as maybe even experienced in the NFL and in pro football and how pro football works, maybe hired a college coach, who knows, it may not have been the same way. They might have collapsed after a few weeks. But I think having Pardee there, like I said, I wish I would have been able to talk to Coach before, as part of the book. But he just seemed like a straight guy, one of those guys that you look to when you're having problems, that you can count on. The players knew they could count on him, and they were loyal to him. They respected him. They said, we are just going to keep playing for him, and we're going to play for ourselves. And it was just an amazing story. To me, it was just still amazing me to this day.
Well, and I think too, and in your afterlife section of the And a Dollar Short book, right, you get into some of what happened to some of the players and the various players, people involved. And Pardee obviously used it very much as a springboard. It was not a fluke. His ability to coach and obviously maybe have the team overperform, shall we say, given all the sort of background circumstances. But I think the saddest thing in all of that, especially in the afterlife section, is what happened to Rommie Loudd. It seems like a very convoluted story, and I'm sure there's a lot more there. But basically wound up in prison for drug possession and the like, and it just seems like a real sort of sad ending to what could have been a very more uplifting story, I guess, at the end of the day with Loudd.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. I mean, he had his supporters there in Orlando. He had his supporters elsewhere. I mean, I've heard from them and talked to them and read about them that, yes, he wasn't completely an island there where everybody didn't like him. He had his supporters. He had people that thought that he didn't get the support he could have gotten from the city, like some other teams do in other leagues, other places that they'll support the team. They'll do what they can to get him there. So yeah, it was a very sad ending for it. But for a man who wanted to, he was the first, you got to remember that he was one of the first black owners in professional sports. I mean, right after Detroit, they started the season with him, with a multiracial group of owners. But, Loudd was right there in the forefront. And, that part of it can't be put aside and not talked about, is the fact that he was a man, he had plenty of people in the front office who are African American. That, this is part of the story too, that, it was just the idea that things just didn't work out. But, the WFL, if nothing else, I think was a little bit more ahead of the NFL as far as minority ownership, minority coaches, minority assistant coaches. I really think that part of the story should be told as well as the negatives. And there was a lot of stuff that came out of the WFL that, the NFL went to the conversion, the extra point. It took quite a few years, but they did. And, they've gone into, markets where the WFL was at the time, like Charlotte. And then they moved teams and had teams there, Jacksonville. So, you've got to look at some of the positives too. And it's sad the way it ended. It's sad the way the season ended and the league itself ended the next year. But, some of the positives should be talked about as well, should not be forgotten, just as the inspirational stories of players, playing for themselves, not getting paid, there's also some of the things that the NFL finally took. They moved their goalposts up, back to the back of the end zone after the WFL did. So the NFL was reacting to some of the stuff that they did to make their game better, just because of WFL. So some of that should be mentioned, should be part of the story as well as the negatives.
Our thanks to Mark Speck. The book is called And a Dollar Short. The Empty Promises, Broken Dreams, and Somewhat Less Than Comic Misadventures of the 1974 Florida Blazers. And it's a wacky story. There's a lot more detail that this book goes into. The book, And a Dollar Short, is published by our friends at St. Johann Press. It is available wherever fine books are found. And you can find this book as well as Mark's other books as referenced, as well as discussed on other episodes, by the way. All of that stuff can be found, and links, obviously, to these books, including this one about the Blazers, at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Yep, that's it. That's the website. You're going to find everything you need to know about this little silly show. At goodseatsstillavailable.com, just search up this episode, or you can use our little search bar in there, and you can type in WFL or Mark Speck or anything that tickles your fancy around our little genre of forgotten sports history. It's all there for you in our 100-plus episodes, and plenty more to come. And by all means, you're going to be able to find, all those other things that'll help you keep connected with the show. Whether that's our social media feeds in Twitter, for example, that's at Good Seats Still. You'll find us on Instagram at Good Seats Still Available. You will find us on Facebook. You can click the link there on the site to sign up for our weekly email newsletter. You can send us email directly if you'd like through the website, or directly at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. All those methods work, and hopefully keep you enthusiastic and interested. And if you got commentary, you got suggestions, whatever, we'd love to hear it. We appreciate when you do so. We also appreciate you leaving us some ratings and reviews, please. Why don't you? Whether that's iTunes, Apple Podcasts, on Stitcher, on Spotify, wherever you listen, wherever you stream. These episodes are now also available on YouTube. You'll find our episodes there. You can just search them up. You want to leave some commentary there too. But by all means, please leave us some kind and helpful and very high and many-starred reviews, because that's how people find out about the show. Other people like you who might be interested, who don't know the show exists, and we can't thank you enough for doing that. We also cannot thank our friends at Podfly Productions enough, and in particular, of course, the very good Dr. Jerry Payne, for all his production help and their production help in helping us get our show up and onto the air every week. And we thank them tremendously. If you're interested in finding out more about their services, by all means, check them out at, wait for it, podfly.net. Yep, podfly.net. And that's our friends at Podfly Productions. Okay, we are done for this week. We appreciate your listening. And until next week, we hope you have a great one. Take care. Bye-bye.